Hey guys, and happy Sunday. Welcome back. I hope you guys all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and you didn't go too crazy with Black Friday. The best thing about Black Friday is just click the button. Don't deal with those crazy crowds. But hopefully you guys made some good scores and you picked up some good films and some other fun toys. So today, guys, here we are, episode 19. I didn't think I'd get this far this quickly. Despite a couple setbacks, though, I'm all the way at episode 19, and I'm pretty excited about it, guys. Today, I talked about in last episode. I'm going to be doing a three-part episode, and each are going to deal with time travel and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. For most people, like obviously I was born in '74. He was unfortunately killed in '63. I wasn't around for the glory days of JFK, but it's one of those things. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, whether you're political or non-political, it really doesn't matter. You have to take stock at that moment in history and go, wow. There'd only been one other assassination, obviously, Abraham Lincoln, way back in the day. And that in itself is interesting, I think. And then number two, I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter where you lean politically. I don't try to get into politics too often with people, and I'm not overly political. But regardless, the impact John F. Kennedy had as a president in the short time that he was president, he was really going to bat and trying to fight for a lot of important things. And who knows what would have happened if he had stayed alive and he'd continued his term in office, and what he would have done and the impact that it would have had on the nation. So all that kind of is leading up, guys, to what I'm talking about today, which is, like I said, a movie that deals with the question of what if. The eternal question we all ask ourselves in life. I'm sure about numerous things. What if I had slept in this morning? What if this had happened? What if that had happened? Well, this begs the question, what if Lee Harvey Oswald had not killed John F. Kennedy? And I'm going to be talking about a movie that came out in 1990. It's a film called Running Against Time. This was made for television. I caught this. I don't think I caught it on its original 1990 date. I think I caught it probably like on like the USA Network, probably like in repeat. And I remember watching it. I was probably like 13, maybe 14 years old, and I've always loved time travel stories. That's like my jam when it comes to sci-fi. I mean, I love all sci-fi, but in particular, I just love time travel stories. I remember watching, like I said, probably 13, 14 years old on USA, and like, wow, this is really, really cool. And, didn't think, after that, didn't think too much of it. I went on with my life, and, you see a lot of movies and you kind of forget about things. And then I remember, like, and I should have written this down, gotten the research on this. I remember about I want to say probably about 15 years ago, Stephen King wrote a book called 11/22/63. And it was also, when I was reading that book, I was like, well, number one, Stephen King can do a lot more than horror, and most of us hopefully know that. He's known for horror, but he can do a lot more than horror. But as I was reading this book, 11/22/63, which also has a similar theme, which is going back in time and trying to prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the effects of that. I was like, wow, this seems familiar. I've come across this theme before somewhere else, and I was racking my brain trying to remember where and when. And thankfully, after some Googling, I was able to answer that question. I was able to come up with the name of this movie we're talking about today, Running Against Time. And I was like, I knew that I had come across this concept somewhere, but it was just driving me crazy trying to remember when and where I'd seen the idea played out. And then, of course, soon realized that you couldn't find the movie pretty much anywhere. I luckily found this movie by using good old Google, and there I think is a website called DVD Planet or something along those lines. If you just Google Running Against Time, and they do basically a very basic DVD-R burn of the VHS of it. The movie was never given an official DVD release. It was given a VHS release. So if you're lucky enough to have a VHS player, I know some people still do, and some people actually still collect VHS. That's a whole other story. Then you could probably track it down on VHS. Otherwise, it's really hard to come across. So I went the route of getting this DVD-R burn, and like I said, it's technically a bootleg. And if it was given an official release, of course I would have bought the official release, but it wasn't, sadly. You can also find it recently. I found it on YouTube. The thing about it, though, it's weird, guys. It's the full movie, but it's like in the corner of the screen, your little window YouTube box, this like size that's like barely nothing, like this big, tiny itty bitty spot. They have the movie playing, and then the rest of the screen is blank. So I mean, I don't know if it's really worth watching it in that way. If you like what you hear about the film after I'm done talking about it, I'm sure there are plenty of pirate sites you can go on, torrent sites, or you can just rip it and put it right on your hard drive on your PC. Or, like I said, you can get a DVD-R burn. There are a couple different websites out there that sell bootlegs of it, and it wasn't expensive. I think when I bought it like 5 or 6 years ago, it might have been like probably 10, $15. Mind you, now my copy didn't come with anything but the disc and a sleeve for the disc. It didn't even come with a case or anything. So I would, just for aesthetic purposes, I would try to see if you could find one that at least came with a case and maybe some fancy cover art. I don't know, but to each their own. Anyway, on to the actual movie, guys. So yeah, Running Against Time. It came out in 1990, and it was a cool little movie, especially for a TV movie. I don't think it had a huge budget. I'm not sure what that was, but it didn't look like it had a ridiculous budget. Um, so I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to go into that. It came out in 1990. It was directed by a guy named Bruce Seth Green. Bruce has a bunch of credits underneath his belt, mostly television from what I can see. And I'm going to just, do a quick, like, greatest hits. I'm not going to give you the guy's entire history because I don't think it's necessary. But he did stuff like Roswell, Dawson's Creek, Gilmore Girls, Charmed, Angel, Sequest, Babylon 5, Hercules, Xena, Doogie Howser, Swamp Thing, Baywatch, T.J. Hooker, MacGyver, and Magnum PI. So, actually, excuse me, it looks like it's all pretty much television. For some reason, I don't know why I thought he had a couple films besides this one we're talking about. But yeah, so he has a pretty big television pedigree. And then when we go to our writers, we have two. We have a guy named Stanley Shapiro and Robert Glass. Now, Stanley Shapiro, he actually wrote a novel, which this is based off of. Same title, Running Against Time. Came out, I think, in 86, maybe 87. It's one of those things that eventually I'll track down because it's time travel. I'm a geek when it comes to my time travel. Besides that, he was known, and once again, I'm not going to give you the guy's entire, resume, but he did like stuff like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, a movie called Carbon Copy, back in the day, Pillow Talk, Petticoat, or Operation Petticoat, excuse me. So those are both like some classic films. And then, like I said, he has a bunch of other stuff on his resume. And then the other writer is Robert Glass. And Robert Glass is known for stuff like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Not of This World, a movie called My Very Best Friend, and something called Death Dreams. And, he has a bunch of other stuff on there too. His resume is a little bit smaller than Mr. Shapiro's. But, it's interesting to see some of that stuff, and see where they came from, what their background is a little bit. Do a little deep dive into that kind of stuff. Now, excuse me, and I made a mistake on the book. That's Stanley Shapiro, really. It's not called Running Against Time. It's called A Time to Remember. So let me just correct myself real quick. And that came out in 1986. I've seen it on Amazon. I've seen it on eBay. So just a heads up, guys, if this is appealing and you want to track down the book, there's your source material. Um, as well as the people behind the scenes, our writers and directors, we'll go into our main cast. Starting off with our main hero, we got Robert Hayes playing David Rhodes. Now, Robert Hayes is one of those guys. I had an experience, I think, like most of us have in the 80s, watching Airplane and Airplane 2, and even as a kid, just cracking up at the ridiculously goofy and silly humor, and he's one of those guys for me, I kind of like saw those movies, thought, okay, he was great in the role, and then just kind of like faded into obscurity, or at least so I thought. Now, when I do a deep dive into Robert Hayes' background, I also realized that he was in another thing that I really loved as a kid. He was in a TV series called Starman. Some of you guys probably remember the excellent movie with Jeff Bridges and Karen Carpenter, I want to say. Probably getting that wrong. But anyway, it was a movie in the early 80s. John Carpenter directed it. Jeff Bridges, really great sci-fi about an alien that comes down to Earth, meets this girl, he falls in love with her. There's a lot more to it. But anyway, a couple years later, flash forward, they did a television series, and Robert Hayes was also in that. And I remember going, wow, this is the guy from Airplane, and now he's in this cool little TV series. And I'm sure it doesn't hold up to the amazingness that I thought it was when I was a kid. Very rarely do they hold up, but I'm curious. I'm going to see if I can track that down because I'd like to see it. I don't think it lasted more than a season. So that was the one that also connected with me as an actor that I recognized. Like, oh, okay. But as I'm going through his credits, I'm realizing this is another guy that's just been kind of all over the place. And again, I'm not going to go through everything, guys. I'm just going to give you the greatest hits when I'm talking to my actors, directors, writers. So he was in Airplane, Airplane 2, Paranormal Movie, Dr. T and the Women, Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey, Raw Justice, She's Having a Baby, Take This Job and Shove It, and there's like a ton of other stuff. Oh, here we go. Here's some of that other stuff. He appeared in Wonder Woman, The Rockford Files, Laverne and Shirley, The Love Boat, The Larry Sanders Show, and Outer Limits. So some of those are a little bit of a greatest hits when it comes to Robert Hayes. Now, next in our cast, we have Chris Rhodes, which is played by Paul Scheer. And I should have, but I didn't really go into his IMDb background credits on this guy. He plays an important part, but it's not a huge part. And I totally forgot to check out his IMDb credits. So we're going to keep that one nice and short for you guys. Next, we have Catherine Hicks, who's playing Laura Whitaker, David Rhodes' girlfriend. And now what's interesting about Catherine is I didn't realize how much stuff she was in. Didn't even think about it. She's got a ton of stuff. And again, greatest hits here. But she played the mom in Seventh Heaven. I remember kind of seeing that and not really being totally interested in it, but that show ran for like a ton of seasons. I think it ran for like 6 or 7 seasons. She was in the Bad News Bears television show. Didn't know they made a television show, but apparently she was in it. Child's Play. She's Out of Control. Remember that one, guys? Peggy Sue Got Married. Razor's Edge, excuse me. I can pronounce words, I promise. Like Father, Like Son. Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. So those were just, like the greatest hits, like I said. Hold on one second, guys. Next up is Sam Wanamaker. Sam Wanamaker plays Hendrik Koopman, Professor Hendrik Koopman. And he's another one of those guys that I wasn't familiar with myself, but hang tight for a second here. he was in stuff like Raw Deal, Private Benjamin, Superman 4. How can we forget Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Baby Boom, and Outer Limits. And again, just the greatest hits of everybody. Um, and then I think that's the main people. The guy that played Lee Harvey Oswald is a guy named James DeStefano. He has, like, even though it's Lee Harvey Oswald, he doesn't have a lot of screen time. It's mainly our three players, Robert Hayes, Sam Wanamaker, and Catherine Hicks. And so that kind of gives you like an introduction to behind the scene and who's acting in it and that kind of stuff. And now I'm gonna just get right into it, guys. So just bear with me. So the movie opens up, and we see two people on a rowboat on a lake. We have David Rhodes and Chris Rhodes, and David is probably maybe 7 or 8. Chris looks like he's probably maybe 18 or 19 years old. They're two brothers, and they're fishing. And basically, Chris, has a conversation with his younger brother, Chris Rhodes, the older brother, about he's going to be going off soon to fight for his country in the Vietnam War. And David's a little bit upset, but he's his older brother and he doesn't want to see him go. But he, realizes his brother is going to fight for his country. And just like a little quaint short scene, kind of establishing strong little start here. And then we cut to, and we see two people on a bed in a bedroom. And that would be an older David, along with a girlfriend. So we have David and his girlfriend, just hang tight for a second, who we're introduced to as Laura Whitaker. And basically, he's making breakfast and, he wishes her a good day. It's nothing crazy. And he goes to work, and we realize that he is a college history professor, and he's in class, and he's talking to his class, and he's talking about the possibility of cause and effect, a ripple in time kind of stuff. Interesting for a history professor, I know, right? You would think that'd more be a science professor, but he brings up the idea to his class how one little thing could change so many things, and you could see the class is kind of interested. Like a lot of kids in class, there's college kids that are kind of like half listening, but you could see that it's something that's kind of like weighing heavily on his mind. So he goes and teaches class, and then afterwards, as he's exiting the classroom, we see his girlfriend, Laura Whitaker, again, and you can see that she's upset, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "Well, that Professor Koopman, the science professor, he's working on some really interesting research, but for whatever reason, he doesn't want to talk about the research. He doesn't want to get into it with me about what he's actually doing. He's saying that he's camera shy, and it's like, this could be a fantastic interview, and it's just disappointing that I can't get him to kind of coax him out of his shell and take a little time to talk to me about what he's doing." So just hang tight for 1 second. So they have that little exchange, and then the next thing we cut to David, and he's at a cemetery. And when he's at the cemetery, we see on the tombstone Chris Rhodes. So you see that he's mourning, still all these years later, the loss of his brother. And then we see another flashback, and hang tight for guys for a second here. Got my cheat sheet here, and they're back on the boat, and again they're talking about Chris going to Vietnam to fight in the war, and David's upset. He's like, "Why are you going? All these people are dying over there. Why are you going?" And Chris is like, "Because it's the right thing to do. It's the patriotic thing. I want to fight for my country." And it's just a quick scene touching on, again, the idea of his brother going to fight in the war, and we're establishing very quickly that he hasn't gotten over, even as an adult, David hasn't gotten over the death of his brother. It's one of those things that's impactful. You lose somebody that's close to you, relative or otherwise. There's certain times when it happens, it just knocks the socks out of you. It just really takes you for a ride. Um, so then we cut back to present day, and we see David next going from the cemetery to the lake, where he shared these moments with his brother, and he's just kind of reflecting. Um, Later that night, we cut to later that night, and David's on he's on the university campus. We realize that he forgot something from work. So he's walking past a building, which just happens to be Professor Koopman's office, and he sees like this weird bright blue light emanating from the building. So he walks into Koopman's office, and he sees like this little musical wind-up toy on a desk, and all of a sudden there's a light flashing in front of him, this blue light, and it disappears. And then a second later, it reappears. And then, of course, he's in shock because he's like, what the hell's going on here? And especially, he's remembering the conversation he had with Laura about how he's working on some sort of scientific experiments. So his curiosity is piqued. But there's not much he can do. So he goes home, and he tells Laura about what happened. And she tells him she actually has some, surprisingly, because they're talking about Koopman anyway, she has some good news. Koopman agreed to be interviewed. And she says Koopman is basically working on trans-dimensional physics, which is basically moving things through space and time. Which, of course, is interesting because he just saw something moved miraculously, appear and disappear and reappear. And she says, if you want to come along for the interview, you're more than welcome to. So, of course, curiosity piqued. He's like, sure, yeah, I'd love to do that. So we cut to the next day, and we meet Professor Koopman for the first time. Laura and David are introduced, and he basically explains his theory on transdimensional physics, and how it's possible, in theory, he thinks, to be able to manipulate things and move things through time and space. From there, after that, we cut to David back in class, and he's talking about, again, cause and effect, and how little things can cause a ripple in time. He just happens to be talking about the day that, unfortunately, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and was gunned down. David poses the question, what would have happened if he had lived? What kind of impact could that possibly have had? And a student raises his hand, and he basically tells a story about how Kennedy was supposed to be pulling troops out in 8 days after he got assassinated on the 22nd of 63, November 22nd, 1963. In another 8 days, he had plans to pull the troops out, and it further cements the idea of what could have happened if Kennedy had lived. And then another student mentions that his uncle unfortunately passed away over in Vietnam. And then David tells the class about how he lost his brother in Vietnam, and unfortunately he was killed, like many other people. So, we're hinting at what's to come, guys, giving you little ideas, little subtle clues here. We cut to our next scene, and we see David walking throughout the university campus, and he sees Professor Koopman on a bench. David tells him he saw the musical box disappear and reappear. He's like, listen, I was walking past your office the other night, and I saw blue light, saw this musical box reappear and disappear and reappear, and of course I was curious. And then when the next day when we talked to you when were interviewed by Laura, you explained your theory about transdimensional physics, and it kind of all adds up. And he's like, "Can I ask you some questions?" And Koopman's not having it. He's upset. He's like, "Listen, uh, I don't want to talk to you about this." You can tell he's like defensive. I don't know if he thinks that maybe David might be working for somebody, or maybe a spy, but he's protective. It's his baby, and I get it. It's understandable. So he kind of blows David off. You can see David's very upset by this, and he's not one to just kind of give up on things. So we cut to later that night, and he kind of goes back onto campus, and he tells us a little security guard, not a little security guard, a security guard there, excuse me, that he has permission to go into Koopman's office, that he left something there. And the security guard's a little bit apprehensive, but he's like, "Oh, well, sure, Mr. Rhodes, David, if you tell me, it must be true." So, he goes into the office, and he's going to try to do some snooping around, see if he can find out some more information on Professor Koopman's experiments. And when he goes into the office, he walks in, a light flashes, and out of nowhere, a dog appears, a little fluffy little dog, and then the dog disappears. Um, uh, he hears some footsteps, and he realizes, oh shit, Professor Koopman's coming into the room. So he attempts to hide, but Professor Koopman finds him, and he confronts him about, like, what are you doing here, and what do you want from me? And David Rhodes is like, "Hey, listen, I can see that obviously your transdimensional physics, time travel, aka time travel, works, and I'd like to help with it in some way." And Professor Koopman's like, "No, it's out of the question. No, I'm not gonna have you be a part of this." And David's like, "Hey, listen, guy, well, Professor Koopman, you and I know that right now you're experimenting by using a dog, but you can't get any information from time traveling with a dog. A dog can't communicate. Also, you're going to be tied up in red tape for years before you actually get authorization from the government to use an actual human as a test subject." He's like, "I'm right here. I'm willing to be your human test subject." Um, and after some talking, um, he's able to convince Professor Koopman that, like, "Hey, yeah, you're right. I am going to need a human test subject, and this might be a way to do. He's got someone that's willing." Uh, David suggests traveling back in time and seeing if he can stop John F. Kennedy from being killed. He said that was such an important part of history, and it had such an impact. Why don't we try for something like that? Um, the professor explains how his time machine works. Basically, you get in it, and it drops you off at a specific time in a specific location, and then he programs it on the computer to pick up at a specific time at a specific location. But the time machine itself doesn't stay with you when you travel in time. It just kind of like drops you off, essentially. Um, he also explains to David he's not sure the effects that it's going to have on him. And he warns him that because he's never tested it other than on his dog, um, David is alive in 1963 as a kid, and he doesn't know the effects it's going to have on his younger self or his current self when he's traveling back in time. So this is all uncharted territory, and you just got to remember to bear that in mind. This is your warning. So they come up with this plan that the next day they're going to travel back in time, and essentially he's going to drop him on the depository building of where Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK. He's going to approximately put him on the roof of the building, and then he'll be able to go exactly to where Lee Harvey Oswald took the shot and basically take Lee Harvey Oswald out of commission, go back up to the roof. Within 20 minutes, the time machine's going to pick him up and bring him back to current day. And that's the game plan. They have it all strategized and figured out. So, of course, things never go as they planned. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. Before we get into the next day, he goes back that night and he tells Laura. And she is very upset. And basically tells him that he needs to let go of the past. And this is about his trying to get over the grief of the loss of his brother. And he's like, yeah, I understand that. But I loved him, and this is something we could do. We could change and make a difference. And not only would it make a difference in my brother's life by keeping him alive, but the difference in what it could do for the country and what JFK would have done if he had managed to survive, if he had managed to live, well, the impact he would have on this country. She's still not happy, but she realizes she loves David, and she has to be there to support him. So she kind of reluctantly, accepts defeat and realizes he's going to do what he's going to do. So the next day, just bear with me for a second, guys. He goes in the time machine, and he arrives in 1963 at the depository building. He's on the roof. Unfortunately, there is a doorway to get downstairs, or to the part of the building where Lee Harvey Oswald is currently perched with his gun ready to take a shot, but it's locked. So he has to kind of kick the door down, and this big struggle. And he arrives there just as Lee Harvey Oswald's about to take out JFK. As he's firing the shot, he runs, tackles him. They get in this big entanglement of a fight, and he manages to pin Oswald to the ground, grab the gun. He basically points the gun at him. Doesn't shoot him, but he points the gun at him. But because the gunfire had already gone off at this point, unfortunately, a couple things. Number one, he took out JFK, unfortunately, because he just didn't get there in time to prevent the shot from being shot. Number one. And then number two, while he was struggling to basically take the gun away from him and beat him up, put him out of commission, the cops arrived, and they found our man David with the gun in his hand. And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald's reaction is, this guy tried to take out the president. So our man David now is the assassinator, excuse me. I mean, I can use my big boy words. The assassinator of John F. Kennedy. So we just changed time. And he basically tries to run. He gets down the street a little bit, but of course, everybody and their brother is after him, and is eventually apprehended by the local authorities. And they point the finger at him, of course, and they try running fingerprints. They can't find anything on him. Obviously, he doesn't exist. Well, his younger self exists, but there is no fingerprints for him in this time period. But they pretty much figured this is the guy. This is the guy that shot Kennedy. And, reasonably so, considering. I'd probably think that too. I think most people would. Just hang tight for a second, guys. So while this is happening, time goes by, and enough to realize Koopman and Laura, who are in the present day, waiting for him to be back, time travel back to the present day, realizing that he's not there. Because like I explained earlier, the time machine, you get in it, it drops you off, and it's programmed to drop off and pick up at a certain time, but the machine doesn't go with you. It just, kind of like beams you to travel back and forth. And they realize that he's not there, and it didn't pick him. When I went to pick him up, there was no one to pick up. So of course they're worried. They realize something must have gone wrong. And what they do is they end up going through those microfilms, at the library, the old microfiche or microfilms, I think they call them. and they go through the newspaper, um, and of course come across November 22nd, 1963, president shot, and they have a big picture of David Rhodes as the man captured, um, and currently in custody and being held for questioning, as the assassinator of JFK. So they realize they have to figure something out. Then, a little while later, the FBI wants to move David to a different prison. And unfortunately, what happens is good old Jack Ruby, just like in real history, comes around and he basically shoots David. And David dies. Ooh, yeah, I know we didn't see that one coming, huh, guys? That's a little bit of a twist. Again, they go back to the microfilm, go through the newspapers. They realize that this person, David, their loved Laura's fiance, and Professor Koopman, they're upset, and they realize they have to figure something out. They have to do something to prevent this from happening. And they realize the only thing they could do is go back the day before. So instead of coming back on the 22nd of November 1963, let's go back to the 21st. And they plan on sending Laura back. And Laura's going to go back the day before. And basically the game plan is for her to basically be dropped off in Dr. Koopman's home residence in 1963. Professor Koopman of 1963 is out of town, so she's basically go in there, call the FBI, warn them of the assassination on the president's life, and then wait to the next day and get David when he transports in time onto the roof in 1963 to meet him on the roof, tell him what happened, and then get picked up in the time machine and go back to present day. So, of course, things don't play out the way they should, because we're talking about time travel and little things can happen and throw everything out of balance, because we wouldn't want a plan that went perfectly as planned, right? Heaven forbid. So that's the game plan. Her to go back in time, call the FBI, warn them, meet David on the roof, stop him from being picked up by the authorities, and like I said, that all goes to shit. So instead, what happens is she does go back in time. She arrives in Professor Koopman's driveway on November 21st, 1963. Unfortunately, she is hit by a car. The irony here is it's Professor Koopman's car. Apparently, the 1963 version of Professor Koopman made plans for his mechanic to pick up his car so it could be serviced. And she arrived right as he was backing the car out of the driveway and runs her over. Now, she's not dead, thankfully. But what does happen is this mechanic, of course, is in shock. Didn't see her. She came out of nowhere. And he calls an ambulance, and she's brought to a hospital. And when she's brought to a hospital, she's not doing good. She's in a coma. And she's in a coma for approximately, well, actually not approximately, we'll just say she's in a coma for just under a day. And when she wakes up, she's a little bit groggy. She's like, "Where am I?" And the nurse tells her, "Oh, you're in the hospital. You were hit by a car." And she looks around and she very quickly realizes that she's in 1963. She remembers the game plan, and the nurse says, "Yeah, you've been in here for just about a day. You were out cold." And she's like, "What time is it?" And she realizes it's like an hour. Number one, a day had expired, and it's an hour before President John F. Kennedy is about to be assassinated. So the nurse exits the room. Laura picks up the phone and she calls the FBI. And as she's trying to explain this to the FBI, the nurse barges back into the room and explains to the FBI that this is a patient at a hospital that had trauma because she was run over by a car and she was been in a coma for almost a day. So the nurse hangs up the phone. Laura realizes everything's gone to shit and she has to figure something out. So she escapes from the hospital, basically steals a car from a young couple that are dropping their car. They're they're stopping by the hospital, and she sees the car. They left the keys in the car, conveniently enough, and she steals the car. She races to the depository building because right now figures the only thing she can do, she has time for, is to save David, excuse me. And when she gets there, we cut to David upstairs in the depository building. Things are playing out like they did the first time he traveled back. He's fighting Lee Harvey Oswald, struggling with getting the gun out of his hands. Then the police arrive. They're about to arrest him. But this time, when he races down the street, instead of being captured by the police, like the first time when he attempted this, Laura's there with the car. She sees him. She's like, "Get in." And they race out of there. And they manage to escape the authorities, at least temporarily. And they hide out in a little dive bar so they can try to figure out what a good game plan would be. So again, this is 2 times, and neither attempts worked, unfortunately, guys. So next, while they're in this bar, they figure out the game plan, what they're going to do, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? We have to figure something out. Why don't we meet up with Dr. Koopman, because he might be back in town, the younger 1963 Dr. Koopman." And thankfully, he is. They reach out to him by phone. He thinks they're nuts, but then he starts talking to Dr. Koopman about his theory on time travel, and he goes into specific details. And then Koopman's a little more open to talking to them. So they meet up with the young 1963 version of Dr. Koopman, and they explain this wild story about what happened up to this point. And they're explaining, like, "Hey, what can we do? How do we figure this out?" And they all come up with an idea, a couple ideas. One, we realized that 1963 Dr. Koopman does know President Johnson. So he's going to try to reach out to President Johnson and explain everything. But he's like, "I'm going to need some sort of proof. President Johnson isn't going to just take me at my word, even though I'm an respected professor and scientist. He's just not going to take me at his word. I need some sort of proof." So what they do is they put an ad in the paper because they know that Koopman's been looking at the newsreels. And basically the ad states, like, "Professor Koopman, please provide us with this newsreel, film reel about President Johnson's term in office, and also pick us up at this point in time, the locations of what date to pick them up at, send the time machine back to, excuse me, and what time to send the time machine back to, the time and the date, location, and this newsreel, or this film reel, excuse me, with President Johnson's like highlights of what he did in his term in office." So older Koopman sees that, and it's all in code, but he's able to kind of figure it out, and he basically sends the film reel back in time to his house, and younger Dr. Koopman finds it, and he goes and talks to President Johnson. He makes an appointment. It's a big to-do to get the appointment, and of course, like any reasonable person, what are you talking about, time travel? What are you talking about? I've just got in office. The president just died. But he implores him. He's like, "Listen, just watch this film reel." Because, JFK, he wanted to pull the troops out. Because in the original history, President Johnson, things got out of control. The war went on too long. We lost way too many troops. So he basically shows him this film reel of President Johnson's term as a president. Like I said, President Johnson is apprehensive at first to believe him, but after he sees the film reel and he sees his history play out and his part in history, he goes, you know what? Well, we're just going to send more troops in, and we're going to go in harder. We're going to end this war quicker. And Professor Koopman was obviously trying to tell him to go the opposite way, like pull out now, like JFK wanted to do. Johnson doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to listen to that. Instead, he takes the film reel and he throws it into a fire, and it seems like, unfortunately, all is lost. So while that's going on, hang tight for just a second. We cut to older Koopman in the future, and he's reading the newsreels for President Johnson's term in office, and you can tell that he didn't listen to the advice, and he just said, fuck it, and I'm going to just go do my own thing. So all that was for nothing. Koopman realizes that he has to go back in time himself one last time and just try to see if he can fix everything and get everything right, because so far we had the original attempt by David, which went horribly wrong with him being captured. Then we had Laura go back in time, but she got hit by a car, and that went horribly awry, and he's like, if you're going to do it yourself. So Koopman goes back in time, realizing that maybe he can fix everything. What he does is he goes back in time moments before Laura arrives. So he goes back in time, like literally like a minute or two before Laura got there, when she traveled, because she traveled November 21st, 1963. I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys here. So he goes back to November 21st, 1963, but he gets there a couple minutes before Laura arrives. He stops her from getting run over by a car. So we got that all wrapped up in a nice little bow for you. And her ending up in a coma. This time they both use his car. They meet up with David at the depository building. Again, everything plays out like it did the first time. He manages to grab the gun from Lee Harvey Oswald. A big chase ensues, but this time Professor Koopman and Laura are there in the car. Koopman explains to David what happened. And David's like, okay, I get it. We're just not meant to save JFK. But he's like, I want to be able to at least have one conversation with my brother. We're already here. So he goes to make a phone call. And when he calls his house in 1963, he realizes that Chris is at the hospital. He's not hospitalized. He hasn't gone off to Vietnam yet. But younger David is in the hospital, and the doctors can't figure out what it is, and that's where he's currently at. And this all ties in to the beginning, where Professor Koopman explained to David, I don't know the effects that it's going to have on either your present self, your adult self, or your kid self. It might have some sort of impact of you being in the past with both bodies existing at the same time. So David's, incredibly upset. He wants to talk to his brother one more time. He wants to see if he can do anything to try to save him. The professor and Laura both try to convince him to go back, because the professor has it set so the time machine's going to show up in like another 10 minutes, and to just call it a day. But David's insisting. He's like, no, I need to talk to my brother one more time. So he insists on it, and Laura is going to stand by David and be there for him. So the professor goes back, and they agree to the next day have the time machine pick them up at a specific time and set of coordinates. And while that's happening, David and Laura decide to go to the hospital where younger David's being held at, and David sees Chris, his brother, in the hospital waiting outside, and he goes up to him, and Chris is like, "Hi, how you doing? Do you know my little brother David? And he's like, no, but I'm the parents of somebody that played with him. So yeah, I kind of know him, he's a good kid. And Chris is like, yeah, he's the best kid. I love him. Um, and basically they have this like touching conversation about losing people. And David's, you can see Chris is upset. David's trying to explain to him that like, he knows what it's like to lose someone and the importance of it. He said that he lost somebody in Vietnam. Chris says that he's about to join up, but he's having doubts. And they have a nice little moment. And you can see David finally make peace with his brother and come to terms with the loss of his brother, because he has his chance to say goodbye. Originally, when David went off to boot camp, he was upset. He never had that moment to connect with his brother one more time before he took off for Vietnam. So he has this little peaceful last talk with his brother and just kind of accept things for what they are. And then next day, we see the time machine pick up Laura first and then David, and they are transported back to present day. And when they get there, they talk to Koopman, and of course Koopman assures them that of course everything is the same. Nothing was changed in the course of history. Lee Harvey Oswald killed the president, of course, and they just kind of have to accept things for what they were. And the moral of the story is don't tamper with time travel, I guess. So Laura and David go back home later that day, and David said he's tired of living in the past, and he gets on his knee and proposes to Laura and asks her to marry her, and she says yes. And while they're there, they hear a phone ring, and they didn't reach it in time, and on the phone is a message, and it's a voice, and it sounds really familiar. It sounds like Chris. And it's saying, hey, where are you? We're supposed to be going fishing. He's like, I'm on the way over. And of course, as that happens, we hear a knock at the door. And who is at the door, of course? But an adult Chris. And we realize that Chris never went to the military. He decided to not join. And we have a nice little happy ending to our story. So yeah, guys, this was a, like I said, it was a made-for-TV movie. It's got a couple things that I would say maybe you might call flaws, like the whole thing with talking to President Johnson. It probably didn't need to be part of it. It was a nice little extra bonus, I guess, but I probably would have trimmed that part out. I think it's a strong story. I mean, I wasn't used to seeing Robert Hayes do a lot of dramatic stuff. Like I said, I saw him do Starman when I was a kid, the TV series, and I enjoyed that. But then again, I was a kid. I don't know how it holds up now. But he's great. Sam Wanamaker's great. Everybody's fantastic in this. And it's a cool little take on the time travel story. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys can seek this out. Even if you do see the shitty copy on YouTube, it is shitty. And like I said, it only takes up a very small portion of the screen. I still think it's worth seeking out. Or if you want to pick up the bootleg copy, just search Running Against Time. I too ran against time, guys. I ran against time to try to get this out on November 22nd, 2023, but just things didn't turn out that way. But I got it out now. And like I said, this is a three-parter, guys, so we got some other exciting stuff coming up. I'm going to be talking to you hopefully this week, later on, and I'm going to be doing next on our time travel JFK experiment. I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite television shows, Quantum Leap, starring the always amazing Scott Bakula as Sam Beckett and Dean Stockwell as Al Calvici. And this is a two-part episode where Sam leaps into the body of Lee Harvey Oswald. And it's also another time travel JFK episode. So that's going to be up next. And I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Just keep in mind, guys, if you like what you're seeing, that's awesome. Be sure to share it with your friends. Subscribe. You can subscribe on my Facebook page. I have a little group there Obviously, subscribe here on YouTube. You can even check me out on TikTok. Also, guys, if you like this, you should definitely check out a couple different podcasts. Number one, Not a Bomb podcast with Brad and Troy. These guys are amazing, and every week they touch base on a different film that bombed at the box office. And like last week, believe it was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo off the top of my head. I might be wrong on that. And they tackle a bunch of different stuff, you know, and it's usually stuff, like I said, that bombed at the box office, and it's just a great little show. And then next we have The Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema with Will and Sammy, and every week they also talk about really interesting films, a wide variety. They're always cluing me on something that I've never seen before, and these guys also great, have wonderful chemistry, and just a really fun and interesting podcast. And definitely check them out. As well as those guys, you have Watch Skip Plus with Justin and Jose. And these guys usually cover the stuff that's coming out in theaters currently, or maybe on streaming service. Um, and so you get all the newest stuff that's coming out in theaters, and they talk about it. And as well, they have an interesting little feature on their podcast, which I'm a big fan of, which is the plus part of the podcast. And with that, they just talk about something new that came out. It might be something they're reading, or something new that they're watching, or maybe a new piece of technology, or it's just a cool little add, a little touch to the podcast. So those are three podcasts you should definitely check out. Also, now I didn't do a lot of like research into this episode, guys, on like the actual history of JFK. I haven't read any books. I have started to watch. There's a 3-part thing on Hulu. I don't remember the title of it, and it's like a little, I think, a mini documentary series about John F. Kennedy, which I'm probably going to take a look into. I saw the first episode. I thought it was good, but I never got around to watching the second and third episode. I eventually do want to read some books more about this event, because I do think it's interesting. But definitely see if you can find this movie, because, like I said, even for a TV movie, guys, it's pretty good. Robert Hayes, I was impressed by his dramatic performances, and same thing with everybody else. Just a really solid little film. If you're a time travel geek or a sci-fi geek, it's definitely worth checking out. So anyway, guys, I hope you have a wonderful week, and like I said, I hope you had a great holiday and you picked up some good deals on Black Friday. And I will see you soon with my next episode. So I'll see you soon, guys. Take care.